Well, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. A warm welcome to the American Foreign Service Association. My name is Ian Houston. I'm the Executive Director of AFSA, and what a terrific way to end the day. We appreciate you attending this conversation with really, truly one of the most respected, informed, and thoughtful members of Congress with us today, Representative Chris Van Hollen. You've made the right decision to be here with us today, so thank you for being here. I will keep my remarks very brief. We have the congressman up until about 4:55, and you don't want to hear from me anyhow. So, but I do wish to thank Booz Allen Hamilton at the outset here for their support of AFSA and for their support of the Fund for American Diplomacy. We have a couple of representatives from Booz Allen with us today, so thank you for your support, Booz Allen Hamilton. And we also have a couple of our governing board members here, AFSA's governing board members. Thank you for your support. For those who are interested, we do have an event on March 15th next week at 11 a.m. with Deputy Secretary of State Thomas Nides, who will be with us to here with us. You're all welcome to attend that. We have provided for you a very brief bio of Mr. Van Hollen on your chairs, so I won't get into too many details here. But I would say that Mr. Van Hollen represents the 8th Congressional District of Maryland. And sir, you may have some constituents here from the 8th Congressional District.
Right, glad to hear that. I hope you're still in it after this redistricting plan they cooked up.
Mr. Van Hollen is the ranking member of the House Budget Committee and was also very involved in the so-called super committee, or the Committee on Deficit Reduction. Mr. Van Hollen, as you all know, is truly a friend of the Foreign Service. I'll go further. He is a part of the Foreign Service family, and the son of Ambassador Christopher and Eliza Van Hollen. Mr. Van Hollen was born in Pakistan. What member of Congress can say that?
That's true.
Ever. Maybe ever.
I think it is. It's a one-person caucus, I can tell you.
His father, some of you may have known him, was a wonderful career Foreign Service officer, former ambassador to Sri Lanka, and assistant secretary. And his mother also, in her own right, was a great public servant working at the CIA and the State Department. So thank you, Mr. Van Hollen, for being here. This session will be moderated by Susan Johnson, the elected president and chair of the board of AFSA. Susan was elected to this position as president in 2009 and was re-elected in 2011, still serving as the chair of the board, the AFSA president. She's a member of the senior foreign service, has a lot of deep experience around the world, many management positions. And AFSA is quite fortunate to have Susan as the leader and at the helm. So thank you, Susan. A portion of this program will be devoted to questions, and we will take those from the audience, but we do ask that we keep those questions short because we don't have a lot of time. We don't have a red light that goes off or a trap door that we can pull to encourage that, but please keep your questions short and to the point and tight. So relax and enjoy the program. Thank you for being here. I'll turn it over to Susan.
Thank you very much, Ian. I appreciate that very much, and it's really a delight to have you here, Congressman Van Hollen. In listening to that intro, not only do we consider you sort of part of the Foreign Service family, because anyone who's been in it by virtue of whatever, birth or anything else, is, I think, always part of it. And a couple of things in common, because you were born in Pakistan and I'm married to a Pakistani, so there's that little odd link, both somewhat unusual in our respective contexts. But anyway, let me just jump right in and get our conversation started, because I know people are interested in hearing from you, and I'm sure you'll be interested in some of the questions from the floor. The first area that I'd like to sort of open with is the whole area of congressional perceptions about public service today, federal employees and the Foreign Service in particular. Many, I think I'd say, in the Foreign Service community today feel that too few members of Congress and the public have a clear understanding of what the Foreign Service is and what we actually do. So the question that we have, and perhaps you can help us get a better understanding, is how can we, as AFSA, the Professional Association and Union of the Foreign Service, enhance the image of U.S. diplomacy with the Congress and with the American public, and strengthen understanding of the role that the Foreign Service plays in advancing and defending our national interests and democratic values overseas?
Well, big question, and let me begin by saying that it's wonderful to be here with all of you. As you said, Susan, once a member of the Foreign Service family, always a member of the Foreign Service family, and I'm a proud member of the Foreign Service family. My father, as you said, served in many different places overseas. Was born in Pakistan. We served in Turkey, in Sri Lanka, in India. I went to high school at a place called Kodaikanal in southern India, and my mother worked in the 1950s. At the CIA, and much later in INR at the State Department on South Asia. Growing up in a Foreign Service family was a great and wonderful and unique experience, and one that I recommend highly to others. And let me just say it's great to be here, and I think I probably represent some of the folks in this room, and I was serious about the redistricting that happened because parts of the 8th District were moved out and new parts are moved in, and I'm going to miss the old part and looking forward to meeting any of you who live in the new part, which is mostly Frederick and Carroll County in the state of Maryland. So first of all, I should say in response to the question that I don't think you can speak of Congress and its perceptions in monolithic terms. I think that different members of Congress, depending on their experience, depending on their interaction with the Foreign Service and the State Department, have different perceptions. But let me begin with the sort of broad question you asked with respect to whether there's an appreciation of the work that is done by federal employees generally. And I think you know from the tenor of the debate that federal employees as a group have become the scapegoat in many ways for those who are looking for solutions to our budget problems. And the rhetoric, in my view, has gotten totally out of control. I serve on the Budget Committee, and we work hard to try and change people's perceptions. But there is a general perception of a bloated democracy that doesn't deliver for the American people. I think that's an easy caricature, and it's dead wrong. And I think we all know federal employees, whether in the Foreign Service or working at NIH, contribute in many ways and extraordinary ways to our country, and I'm not going to go into all the details of how we do it. With respect to the Foreign Service, I do think that there's an appreciation of the hardship and risks and sacrifices that many in the Foreign Service take for the good of the country. But nevertheless, when it comes time for the budget, at least, and this is not a partisan statement, this is just a statement of fact, when you look at the budget put forward by our Republican colleagues in the House last year, they really did cut into the whole area of the Foreign Service, State Department, international assistance. The good news is during the back and forth in the budget process, when you got the Senate and the President and the White House engaged, we were able, I think, to come out with a budget that served the needs of the country. But this is an ongoing battle. Well, I'm sure you all know that as part of this latest discussion over the payroll tax cut extension, part of the way that the unemployment component was paid for. So we had the payroll tax cut extension, and then we had the unemployment insurance extension. And the unemployment insurance extension was paid for in large part, about 50%, by a change in the contributions to retirement for federal employees. Now, there's the good news and the bad news. The good news is Senator Cardin and I were able, both of whom were conferees, insisted that current federal employees be held harmless. It was our view. It was our view that people entered into federal service and the Foreign Service under a certain set of expectations, and it's just unfair to change the rules of the game. And that while we didn't think that we should be asking for such a large contribution from future federal employees that if you were going to do something, that was the appropriate place to draw the line. And our concern with the overall package was simply that, when you're dealing with an extension of unemployment insurance for a short period of time, you really shouldn't be using permanent changes in anyone's pension plan, even future employees, to be dealing with that. We've always said that federal employees are willing to do their fair share to contribute to reducing the deficit, but it has to be part of a balanced package. I mean, we need shared responsibility and shared sacrifice, and nobody should be singled out. So going forward, these discussions, and we may get into this later, and there are going to be broader discussions about the deficit. And again, I would say that you shouldn't be singling out federal employees. They do terrific work on behalf of the country. Federal employees have already contributed about $60 billion to deficit reduction through the denial of COLAs for 2 years, and this year a reduced COLA if we're successful getting that at the end of the budget process, which is still something very much at risk. So that was a long answer to what is a very big question, though. In terms of how we can change perceptions, look, we're all going to have to work together. The testimony that's given before the Budget Committee and the Appropriations Committee and the Foreign Affairs Committees as to the important contribution of the Foreign Service to international diplomacy and our national security is absolutely essential. And it's always important when Secretaries of Defense who are testifying before the Congress point out how important diplomacy and the political interaction that all of you have with our counterparts overseas and development, how those components are very important parts of our overall national security strategy and our ability to engage with and influence, engage with the world that influence events. And we just need to keep it up. It's never been easy, I should say. When you have an economic downturn and great stress on the budget, it just becomes a lot. That's when the rhetoric gets more heated. So, long answer. It's a big question.
No, thank you. I mean, there could be a lot of follow-up questions, but I'll leave that to the audience and move maybe to part of what the meat of what at least some of us are interested in and you could help with, which is the international affairs budget against the backdrop of the economic pressures and fiscal constraints that you've mentioned. In recent public debate about America's role in the world, we've heard of calls for greater diplomatic engagement and recognition that diplomatic readiness is critical to defending our interests overseas, particularly today and as we move into a more competitive global arena. Yet, in recent years, when it comes time for Congress to actually provide funding for the personnel, the programs, the initiatives, the education, training, whatever that we need to have the quality diplomatic service our nation needs, we've seen many proposals for deep cuts, and we appreciate how difficult it is. But do you have any thoughts on how we might strengthen the connection between adequate, if not robust, funding for the international affairs budget and an effective foreign service and diplomatic service for our country?
Right. So, first of all, we need your help, and we need for people to tell their stories whenever possible, because you know, the leverage we get as a country from foreign work of the Foreign Service is just huge diplomatically, and it's not always fully appreciated. I have one quote, and I mentioned how it's important for Secretaries of Defense to talk about the important contribution of the Foreign Service, and Secretary Gates used to do that a lot. When Secretary Panetta was before the House Budget Committee recently, I asked him if he agreed with the Secretary Gates' position. He said he absolutely did. The diplomacy and development was part of it. But let me just read you a quote from Secretary Gates, and then we'll sort of flesh out the answer a little more. This is what Secretary Gates said, and I quote, "I never miss an opportunity to call for more funding for and emphasis on diplomacy and development. Whatever we do should reinforce the State Department's lead role in crafting and conducting U.S. foreign policy, to include foreign assistance, of which building security capacity is a key part. In another speech, he said, if you look, he said, working for me, this is Secretary Gates, are 2 million men and women in uniform. Secretary Clinton has, I think, somewhere south of 7,000 Foreign Service officers. If you look at all the Foreign Service officers in the world, they would barely crew one aircraft carrier. That's from Secretary Gates. So my point is that to the extent that all of our leaders can just constantly remind people of the important part that diplomacy and development play in our ability to, as I said earlier, engage with the world and influence events, the better off we are. Because, look, everybody has veterans in their district who have done incredible service on behalf of our country in the United States military. And so everybody has direct contact with people who have served our country, and they have a really good appreciation of that work through their own experiences. But people have less understanding and appreciation of the Foreign Service, which, you know, is 7,000 people, not spread out all over the country, but spread out all over the world, doing work on behalf of the United States government. And I just think, you know, it's important for members of Congress to tell the story. It's also important for others to tell that story throughout the country and in communities around the country. So I would urge all of us, you know, through groups and like, you know, the World Affairs Council, a lot of other groups that have chapters around the country. That's an opportunity to sort of send people out on the road and talk about the important story of the Foreign Service. Now, with respect to the budgets, I mean, again, there's the good news and the bad news. There have been a lot of big fights on the budget recently. The outcomes have been better than the heated rhetoric suggests. I think people would agree with that. For example, last year, the original House budget significantly cut the State Department operations. Last year's budget, and we do 10-year budgets, the House Republican budget cut foreign assistance State Department operations by about $240 billion over 10 years. A massive cut, just a massive cut. You know, the good news is we take these 1 year at a time when it comes to the appropriations. And the President and the White House and the Senate, with the support of those of us in the House that are very focused on these issues, we were able to actually, you know, put together a pretty good budget. Now, it's not the budget we would like to see in terms of maximizing the potential of the Foreign Service, because I think we would do better if we actually had more people around the world doing the work of the Foreign Service. But at least in this current political and economic environment, it was pretty much a hold harmless budget. Now, we have been able in the last couple years to fund some things that have been traditionally funded in the base budget through what we call the OCO account, so the Overseas Contingency Account. And those accounts are funding most of our operations today in Iraq and Afghanistan and Pakistan. And if those sort of supplemental funds were to disappear and you would have to fund your foreign assistance programs to Pakistan and Iraq and Afghanistan and your other programs, development and otherwise, that would obviously be a different situation. And if those had to come out of the base budget, that would significantly impact on the State Department budget. So we need to find a way to make that transition in a way that doesn't cause, you know, doesn't hurt the rest of the budget.
Well, we certainly appreciate the kinds of statements like the one you've quoted that Secretaries of Defense, Secretary Gates in particular, but Secretary Panetta as well, have made about the importance of diplomacy, and certainly take your point, and we understand that it's always helpful when third parties are saying something about the importance of diplomacy, and it's not just we ourselves trying to tell that story. And I hope that this is something that maybe the White House can also keep in mind when the President speaks as well, because here's a #1, consumer, and if anyone should understand the importance of a strong diplomatic service, it should be the Executive and the President of the White House. So we certainly hope that there would be more of that, but take your point about we need to do more ourselves to tell our own story and around the country, not just in Washington. Let me just go back to another budget-related question. Maybe this has to do with strategy or tactics, but what are your thoughts on the efforts that have been made recently to link military and diplomatic operations sort of more explicitly together, maybe again in a larger national security category, as we've gone through the various budget discussions, debates, fights, however you'd like to call them? What do you think the effect of this linkage will be on the budgets for our foreign affairs agencies, our civilian foreign affairs agencies, and the diplomatic and development side of the house? Going to help us or
Right.
going to hurt us?
Well, before I get to that, just on your point in working to get the President and the White House to, I think, make this point just as Secretary Gates and Secretary Panetta have, I think that's something we should certainly encourage. I think I'm absolutely convinced that the President has a strong appreciation for the work of the Foreign Service, and I think it is important that they articulate that at every opportunity. One of the points we've made in this whole fight over the budget and federal employees is that some of the efforts that most people